The wind howled across the granite peaks like the dying breath of some ancient god. I stood at the edge of the precipice, my headlamp cutting a narrow beam through the darkness that seemed to swallow everything beyond its reach. Below me, the valley stretched into an abyss so deep that even the moonlight couldn't penetrate its depths. But it wasn't the valley that had drawn me here through 3 days of treacherous climbing and nights spent shivering in a sleeping bag, rated for temperatures far warmer than what these mountains demanded. It was the cave. The locals in the village below had spoken of it in hushed tones, their weathered faces growing pale whenever the conversation turned to the hole in the mountain that no man should enter. They called it many things. The mouth of the earth. The doorway to the underworld, the place where the mountain keeps its secrets. But what they all agreed on was this: those who ventured inside never returned the same. Some never returned at all. I had dismissed their warnings as folklore, the kind of superstitious nonsense that clings to remote places like moss on stone. After all, I was a professional cave explorer with 15 years of experience spelunking through some of the most dangerous underground systems on the planet. I had crawled through passages so narrow that my shoulders scraped the walls on both sides. I had rappelled into chambers so vast that my light couldn't reach the ceiling. I had navigated underwater sections where a single wrong turn meant drowning in absolute darkness. But standing here now, staring at the black mouth of the cave that yawned open in the mountainside like a wound in the earth itself, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Fear. Not the healthy respect for danger that keeps experienced climbers alive, but genuine primal terror that seemed to emanate from the cave itself. The entrance was massive, easily 30 feet high and twice as wide. Ancient water had carved it from the living rock over millions of years, creating smooth walls that curved inward like the throat of some sleeping beast. Stalactites hung from the ceiling like yellowed teeth, and the air that drifted out carried a smell I couldn't identify. It wasn't the typical cave scent of mineral deposits and stagnant water. This was something else entirely. Something organic and old and wrong. My equipment check revealed everything in perfect order. Ropes rated for twice my body weight, headlamp with backup batteries that would last 48 hours, emergency beacon that would transmit my location to rescue teams if activated. Climbing gear tested and retested. Enough food and water for 3 days underground. I had prepared for every contingency I could imagine. What I hadn't prepared for was the way the cave seemed to watch me as I approached its entrance. The first few meters were standard. Solid rock beneath my feet, walls that showed the typical signs of water erosion, ceiling high enough that I didn't need to crouch. My headlamp beam swept across formations that would have been beautiful in any other cave system. Flowstone cascades frozen in time, columns where stalactites and stalagmites had joined over millennia, crystal formations that caught my light and threw it back in prismatic rainbows. But there was something fundamentally wrong with the geometry of the place. The passages didn't follow the logical patterns that water carving typically creates. Instead of the meandering curves and gradual descents I expected, the tunnel branched at perfect right angles. The walls showed tool marks as if they had been carved rather than naturally formed. But what tools could have created passages of this scale? And who would have undertaken such a massive excavation in a mountain so remote that it appeared on no modern maps? 20 minutes into my descent, I encountered the first of the symbols. They were carved into the wall at shoulder height, running in a continuous band along both sides of the passage. At first glance, they appeared to be some form of ancient writing, but no alphabet I had ever studied matched their angular, almost geometric design. Each symbol was precisely cut into the stone to a depth of exactly 3 centimeters. The spacing between them was mathematically perfect. Whoever had created them possessed both the tools and the knowledge to achieve a level of precision that would challenge modern equipment. I documented everything with my camera, taking detailed shots from multiple angles. The symbols seemed to shift in my peripheral vision, but when I looked directly at them, they remained static. I attributed this to fatigue and the disorienting effect of artificial light in total darkness. The mind plays tricks underground. Every experienced caver knows this. The passage continued downward at a steady angle of 15 degrees. My altimeter showed I had descended nearly 200 meters from the entrance when I encountered the first chamber. It was enormous. My headlamp beam couldn't reach the far walls, and when I shouted, the echo took nearly 4 seconds to return. The ceiling disappeared into darkness, so complete that it seemed solid, but what stopped me cold wasn't the size of the chamber. It was what occupied its center. A structure, clearly artificial, undeniably ancient. It rose from the chamber floor like a stepped pyramid, but its proportions were all wrong. The angles were too sharp, the surfaces too smooth. The same strange symbols covered every visible face, arranged in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The material wasn't stone like the surrounding cave walls. It was something else entirely. Something that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. I approached cautiously, my footsteps echoing in the vast space. The structure was larger than I had initially estimated. Each level was roughly 10 meters square, rising in diminishing tiers to a flat summit approximately 40 meters above the chamber floor. Narrow staircases, each step carved to accommodate a foot much larger than any humans, ascended each face. The craftsmanship was beyond anything I had ever encountered. Every edge was perfectly straight. Every surface was polished to a mirror finish. The joints between blocks were so tight that I couldn't slide a knife blade between them. This was not the work of primitive peoples using crude tools. This was engineering that rivaled modern construction techniques. But who had built it? And why here, in a cave so remote and dangerous that even the local population feared to approach it? I began my documentation, photographing every angle, every symbol, every architectural detail I could capture with my equipment. The images would need to be analysed by experts far more qualified than myself. Archaeologists who specialised in pre-Columbian architecture, linguists who might recognise the symbolic language, geologists who could determine the age of the construction. As I worked, I became aware of a sound that hadn't been present when I first entered the chamber. A low humming, almost below the threshold of hearing, that seemed to come from the structure itself. I pressed my ear against one of the blocks and felt a vibration so subtle it might have been my imagination. But the sound was real. Something within the pyramid was active. My rational mind suggested natural explanations. Underground water flowing through hidden channels, geological processes that created acoustic effects in the unique environment, thermal expansion and contraction of the mysterious material as it adjusted to the temperature change caused by my presence. But deep down, in a part of my consciousness that predated logic and scientific reasoning, I knew these explanations were insufficient. Whatever hummed within that ancient structure was not natural. It was purposeful, deliberate, waiting. The beam of my headlamp began to flicker. I tapped the housing and the light steadied, but for a moment, in that brief darkness, I could have sworn I saw other lights moving within the pyramid. Faint phosphorescent glows that pulsed in rhythm with the barely audible humming. I checked my watch. 4 hours had passed since I entered the cave. According to my planned timeline, I should begin my return to the surface within the next 2 hours to ensure I reach the entrance before dark. But the pyramid demanded further investigation. This discovery would revolutionize our understanding of ancient civilizations. The academic implications alone justified the risk of an extended exploration. That was when I noticed the other passages. 3 additional tunnels branched off from the chamber, each one perfectly circular and descending at angles that defied natural formation. They were positioned at precise intervals around the pyramid's base, as if the structure served as some kind of hub for a larger network of passages. The openings were identical in diameter, approximately 3 meters across, with walls so smooth they appeared to have been bored by machinery rather than carved by hand. I chose the passage that aligned most closely with magnetic north, marking my decision point with reflective tape so I could find my way back to the main chamber. The tunnel descended more steeply than the entrance passage, and the air grew noticeably warmer as I progressed. My thermometer registered an increase of 8 degrees Celsius within the first 50 meters, suggesting I was approaching some kind of geothermal source. The symbols continued along these walls as well, but their arrangement was different here. Instead of the continuous band I had observed in the upper passages, these markings formed complex geometric patterns that covered entire wall sections. Some appeared to be mathematical equations, though the notation system was unlike anything in recorded human history. Others resembled star charts or astronomical diagrams depicting celestial bodies in configurations that didn't match any known planetary alignments. The tunnel curved gradually to the right, following what seemed to be the natural contour of the mountain. But after 20 minutes of steady descent, I realized the curvature was too regular to be coincidental. Someone had deliberately designed this passage to follow a specific path, though for what purpose remained unclear. The humming grew stronger as I descended, no longer a subtle vibration but an audible tone that resonated through the stone around me. It pulsed in a rhythm that was almost organic, like the beating of some massive heart buried deep within the mountain. The sound seemed to affect my equipment as well. My compass needle began to drift, spinning slowly in circles rather than pointing toward magnetic north. The altimeter readings became erratic, jumping between values that made no sense given my steady descent. 2 hours into the secondary passage, I encountered something that made me question everything I thought I understood about the age of this place. Fresh air. Not the stale, recycled atmosphere typical of deep cave systems, but clean, oxygen-rich air with a slight metallic tang that reminded me of the smell after lightning strikes. It flowed steadily up the passage from somewhere far below, carrying with it traces of ozone and something else I couldn't identify. Something that made the hair on my arms stand up and sent shivers down my spine, despite the increasing temperature. The passage opened suddenly into another chamber. This one smaller than the first, but far more disturbing. The walls were lined with alcoves, each one containing what appeared to be some kind of technological device. The objects were clearly artificial, but followed no design principles I recognized. Curved surfaces met angular planes in configurations that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. Materials that looked like metal but felt warm to the touch were integrated with crystalline structures that pulsed with their own internal light. None of the devices showed any signs of corrosion or age. They appeared to be in perfect working condition, as if they had been installed yesterday rather than centuries or millennia ago. Some emitted the humming sound I had been hearing, while others produced high-pitched tones just at the edge of human hearing. A few displayed what looked like holographic projections, three-dimensional images that hung in the air without any visible projection source. I documented everything, but my camera began malfunctioning almost immediately. The images came out distorted, showing strange interference patterns and color shifts that bore no resemblance to what I was seeing with my naked eye. The digital files became corrupted as soon as they were written to memory, reducing detailed photographs to abstract swirls of light and shadow. The largest device occupied the chamber's center, rising from floor to ceiling in a column of seamlessly integrated components. Its surface was covered in the same symbols I'd been observing throughout the cave system, but these were different. They glowed with their own light, shifting through a spectrum of colors that had no names in any human language. The intensity of their illumination pulsed in sync with the humming, creating a hypnotic pattern that was difficult to look away from. As I circled the central device, trying to understand its purpose, I noticed that the symbols weren't randomly arranged. They formed a sequence, a progression that suggested some kind of operational manual or instruction set. The pattern began at floor level and spiraled upward, growing more complex with each revolution around the column. Against every instinct screaming at me to flee, I reached out and touched one of the glowing symbols. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Light flooded the chamber, not from any visible source, but from the very air itself. The humming sound exploded into a symphony of tones that seemed to come from inside my own head. Every device in the chamber activated simultaneously, their projections merging into a three-dimensional display that filled the entire space around me. I was no longer looking at static images, but at moving scenes, dynamic representations of places and events that couldn't possibly exist. Cities that floated in space without any visible means of support. Beings that moved through landscapes under alien skies, their forms shifting between recognizable and utterly foreign. Technologies that manipulated matter itself, reshaping reality according to principles that violated every law of physics I had ever learned. The visions weren't random. They told a story, though one that challenged my ability to comprehend its implications. I saw the construction of the cave system, watched as beings of impossible geometry carved tunnels through solid rock using tools that transformed stone into flowing liquid. I witnessed the installation of the devices, observed as each component was carefully positioned according to some grand design. But most disturbing were the images of the pyramid chamber. I watched as figures in environmental suits that suggested technology far beyond our current capabilities performed what could only be described as rituals around the structure. They moved in patterns that matched the symbol sequences on the walls, their gestures precise and purposeful. The final vision showed the mountain as it existed above ground, but not as I had seen it during my ascent. This version was alive with activity. Structures extended from the peak like crystalline growths, pulsing with energy that connected them to similar installations on distant mountains. A network of some kind, spanning continents, possibly the entire planet. The display began to fade, the lights dimming back to their original intensity. But before the visions disappeared entirely, I saw something that made my blood freeze in my veins. One of the figures in the environmental suits turned toward the viewing perspective, looking directly at me across whatever impossible gulf of time or space separated us. Its face was visible through the suit's transparent faceplate, and it was unmistakably human. Not alien, not some exotic extraterrestrial species, but a person who could have walked down any street in any modern city without attracting attention. Except for the eyes. Those were different. They held an intelligence that seemed ancient beyond measure, a knowledge that encompassed things no human mind should be capable of understanding. And in that brief moment of contact, I felt that intelligence touch my own consciousness, examining me with the same clinical detachment I might use to study an insect under a microscope. Then the connection severed, leaving me alone in the chamber with devices that had returned to their previous state of quiet activity. I stumbled backward, my legs trembling from what I had just witnessed. The chamber felt different now, charged with an energy that made the air itself seem thick and oppressive. My breathing came in short gasps, not from exertion, but from the overwhelming realization that I was standing in something far beyond my understanding. The devices continued their quiet humming, but I could swear they were watching me now. Every surface that had previously seemed inert now felt alive, aware, purposeful. The symbols on the walls pulsed with a rhythm that matched my heartbeat, as if the entire chamber had somehow synchronized itself to my biological functions. I needed to document what had happened, but my equipment continued to malfunction in ways that defied explanation. The camera displayed error messages in languages that didn't exist. My audio recorder captured sounds that weren't present in the chamber, voices speaking in harmonics that human vocal cords couldn't produce. The GPS unit showed coordinates that placed me simultaneously in 17 different locations across 3 continents. Something had fundamentally altered in the relationship between this place and the physical laws I had spent my entire career taking for granted. The chamber existed in a state that challenged the basic assumptions of reality itself. Distance seemed negotiable. Time felt fluid. Cause and effect operated according to principles that my rational mind rejected, but my deeper consciousness somehow understood. I forced myself to move, to break the hypnotic hold the glowing symbols seemed to exert on my attention. Each step required conscious effort, as if I were walking through water that grew denser with every movement away from the central device. The air resistance was impossible, yet undeniably real. 3 more passages branched off from this chamber, each one leading deeper into the mountain's interior. They descended at angles that my instruments couldn't measure accurately, their depths hidden by darkness so absolute it seemed to have physical presence. The air flowing from these passages carried scents that triggered memories I didn't possess, emotions connected to experiences that had never happened to me. I chose the leftmost tunnel, marking my path with reflective tape that immediately began to behave strangely. Instead of staying where I placed it, the markers seemed to migrate along the walls, repositioning themselves according to some pattern I couldn't decipher. When I looked back after walking 50 meters, the tape had arranged itself into symbols that matched those carved into the stone. The passage walls here were different from anything I had encountered in the upper levels. The stone appeared to be alive, its surface rippling with movement, too subtle to observe directly, but unmistakable in peripheral vision. Touching the walls revealed a texture that shifted between rough granite and smooth metal, depending on the pressure and duration of contact. Temperature fluctuations became extreme and unpredictable. One moment I was shivering in air cold enough to see my breath, the next I was sweating in tropical heat. My thermometer registered readings that spanned a range of 40 degrees Celsius within the space of a few steps, yet the transitions felt gradual and natural rather than jarring. The mathematical precision of the construction became even more evident as I descended. Every angle was calculated to create specific acoustic effects. Every surface was positioned to reflect and focus sound in ways that transformed my footsteps into musical tones. The passage itself had become an instrument, designed to produce harmonies that resonated through the entire mountain. When I stopped walking, the silence was not empty, but full of potential. I could hear the mountain breathing, feel its pulse through the soles of my boots. The rock around me was not dead stone, but something that existed in a state between organic and mineral, between natural formation and deliberate construction. 2 hours into this new passage, I encountered the first of the chambers that would haunt my dreams for the rest of my life. The space opened without warning, my headlamp beams suddenly unable to find walls or ceiling. But unlike the previous chambers, this one was not empty. It was filled with structures that defied every architectural principle I had ever learned. Buildings that folded in on themselves, creating impossible geometries where interior spaces were larger than their exterior dimensions. Bridges that connected to nothing, spanning gaps that existed in more than 3 dimensions. The construction materials were unlike anything in human experience. Surfaces that appeared solid became transparent when viewed from certain angles. Walls that seemed to be made of stone revealed themselves to be composed of crystallized light. Foundations that should have required massive support systems floated freely in space, anchored to reality by forces that operated outside conventional physics. I emerged from that mountain forever changed, carrying knowledge that no human mind was meant to possess. The locals' warnings hadn't been superstition after all. They had been trying to protect something far more precious than my life. They had been trying to protect my humanity itself. The cave holds secrets that rewrite everything we think we know about our past, our future, and our place in a universe far stranger than we ever dared imagine. Some doors once opened can never be closed again.